The dust rose like smoke from the trail, catching the late afternoon light in golden swirls. A lone rider approached, his silhouette wavering in the heat. The man sat tall in his saddle, one hand on the reins, the other resting on a leather mail pouch strapped to his mount. His horse, a chestnut mare with a white blaze, trotted steadily across the cracked earth. Without warning, the mare's front hoof caught in a prairie dog hole. She stumbled, pitching forward with a startled whinny. The rider clutched at the saddle horn, barely keeping his seat. The worn leather strap of the mail pouch snapped. The bag tumbled to the ground, hitting a rock and splitting open like a gutted fish. Letters scattered across the trail, white against the rust-colored dirt. The wind picked up, catching the papers and sending them dancing across the plains. The rider dismounted, cursing as he scrambled to gather the wayward mail. His fingers closed around envelope after envelope, stuffing them back into the torn pouch. One letter caught in a sagebrush, fluttering like a trapped bird. The rider plucked it free, turning it over in his weathered hands. The heavy cream-colored paper bore an official wax seal, the emblem of the state governor. The rider stared at it for a long moment before tucking it away with the others. Behind him, more letters tumbled across the open land, carried by the wind toward the small town of Willow Creek that lay in the distance. Clara Jensen stood at her kitchen window, watching the sun sink toward the horizon. At 52, her face had settled into the gentle lines of middle age, her once auburn hair now streaked with silver. She dried her hands on her apron and gazed out at her small garden where tomato plants strained toward the fading light. 5 years had passed since Thomas died. 5 years of quiet mornings and silent evenings in this house they'd built together. Sometimes she still heard his laugh echoing down the hallway, or caught the phantom scent of his pipe tobacco on the porch swing. Willow Creek had changed little in those 5 years. The same families occupied the same houses. The same businesses lined Main Street. The same church bell rang every Sunday morning. And always, visible from nearly anywhere in town, the State House rose above everything else, its stone facade gleaming white against the blue sky. Governor Richard Harmon had been in office for nearly a decade now. Clara rarely thought about him, though his face stared down from portraits in the post office and town hall. Politics had never interested her much, even when Thomas was alive, and would spend evenings debating the governor's policies with neighbors over glasses of whiskey. Clara turned from the window and reached for her shawl. The evening had brought a chill, and she needed to close the chicken coop before dark. As she stepped outside, she noticed a commotion near the edge of town. People were gathering, pointing towards something in the distance. Curiosity pulled her forward. She made her way down the dirt path that connected her small house to the main road, nodding to Mrs. Peterson, who was hurrying in the same direction. Mail carrier's horse took a tumble out on the eastern trail, Mrs. Peterson explained, slightly breathless. His pouch burst open. Papers everywhere. Sheriffs asking for help gathering them up before the wind takes them clear to the next county. Clara followed the growing crowd to where the trail met the town limits. 20 or so townsfolk were spread out across the plains, bending and reaching as they collected scattered envelopes from the grass and brush. The mail carrier stood with the sheriff, holding his torn pouch and looking distressed. Might as well lend a hand, Clara murmured to herself, stepping off the path. The setting sun cast long shadows as she moved through the grass, eyes scanning for the white corners of envelopes. She found 3 in quick succession, tucking them into her apron pocket. The 4th letter lay half-hidden beneath a clump of wild grass. As Clara bent to retrieve it, the handwriting on the envelope caught her eye. The elegant script formed a name she recognized immediately: Richard Harmon, the governor himself. Clara hesitated, the envelope between her fingers. It wasn't addressed to him, but from him, sent to someone named Margaret Winters at an address in the next county. The seal had broken when it fell, the flap hanging open like an invitation. She should close it, hand it to the sheriff with the others. But something made her pause, her thumb brushing across the expensive paper. Before she could reconsider, Clara slipped the letter from its envelope and unfolded it. Her eyes widened as she read the first lines. The letter spoke of arrangements being made, of money transferred discreetly, and then a reference that made her breath catch. Our son. The governor wrote of a young man, now 25 years old, who must never know the truth of his parentage. Clara's hands trembled. She quickly refolded the letter, glancing around to ensure no one had seen. The sheriff was calling everyone back, announcing they'd gathered enough of the mail to satisfy the carrier. She should return this letter. She knew she should, but instead, Clara slipped it deeper into her pocket, feeling its weight against her thigh as she walked back to join the others. That night, Clara sat at her kitchen table, the lamp burning low as she read the letter again. The governor's words revealed a relationship spanning decades, a secret affair with this Margaret, resulting in a child they had both agreed to keep hidden from the world. The boy must never know, the governor had written. For his sake as well as mine. The arrangements we agreed upon will continue, but we cannot risk any contact. The election approaches, and there are always those looking for ways to destroy a man. Clara folded the letter carefully, her mind racing. Governor Harmon had cultivated an image of moral rectitude, a family man devoted to his wife of 30 years. This letter threatened everything he had built. But it wasn't the governor's reputation that kept Clara awake that night. It was the thought of the son, a man now, somewhere in the world, unaware of who his father truly was. Did he believe himself an orphan? Or had he been raised by this Margaret, told some convenient lie about his father's identity? The next morning found Clara at the post office. She nodded to Bill Turner, who'd been postmaster for as long as anyone could remember. "Morning, Clara," he said, sorting through a stack of mail. "What brings you in today?" "Just wondering," she said carefully, "if you ever handle mail for a Margaret Winters? Might have lived around here some years back." Bill scratched his gray beard. "Winters? Can't say it rings a bell. But then, I've sorted a lot of names over the years." He studied her curiously. "Any particular reason you're asking?" Clara forced a smile. "Just thought I recognized the name from somewhere. Probably mistaken." She left the post office and walked slowly down Main Street, past the general store and the barber shop. The State House loomed at the end of the road, its white columns gleaming in the morning sun. Clara had never given it much thought before, but now she found herself staring up at its windows, wondering which one belonged to the governor's office. A week passed. Clara told herself to forget the letter, to burn it, and pretend she'd never seen it. But each night, she found herself taking it out, reading those damning words again. The governor's secret son, a life hidden away. Then, on Sunday after church, she overheard a conversation that made her blood run cold. "Mail carrier says there's still one letter missing," Mrs. Peterson was telling the butcher's wife. "An important one, apparently, from the governor himself." "What was in it?" the butcher's wife asked. "Nobody's saying, but the carrier's worried. Says he could lose his position if it doesn't turn up." Clara hurried home, her heart pounding. She took the letter from its hiding place in her sewing basket and sat heavily in Thomas's old armchair. What had she done? A man's livelihood was at stake because of her impulsive decision. But returning the letter now would mean explaining why she'd kept it. The scandal it would create. The lives it would destroy. That afternoon, Clara found herself walking to the edge of town, toward the old cemetery where Thomas lay buried. She often came here to talk to him, to sort through her thoughts in the quiet presence of his memory. As she approached his grave, she noticed a fresh bouquet of wildflowers resting against the headstone. Clara frowned. She hadn't left those. "I hope you don't mind," a voice said behind her. "He was kind to me once." Clara turned to find a young man standing a few feet away. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and eyes that seemed strangely familiar. He couldn't have been more than 25. "You knew my husband?" Clara asked. The young man nodded. "My name's James Winters. Thomas helped me when I first came to town a few years back. I was just passing through again and wanted to pay my respects." Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Winters, the same surname as the woman in the letter. Did you grow up around here, James?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "No, ma'am. Grew up about 40 miles east with my mother. Never knew my father." He said it matter-of-factly, without self-pity. "I come through every few months on business. Your husband gave me my first job when I needed it most." Clara studied his face more carefully. Now that she was looking, she could see it, the resemblance to the governor. The same strong jaw, the same set of the eyes. How had she never noticed before? "Your mother," Clara said carefully. "Is her name Margaret?" Surprise flickered across James's face. "Yes, ma'am." "Did Thomas speak of her?" Clara's mind raced. "In passing," she said. "Will you be in town long?" "Just until tomorrow. I have deliveries to make in the capital next." He gestured toward a wagon visible on the road behind him, loaded with crates of produce. "Perhaps you'd join me for supper tonight," Clara heard herself saying. "I'd like to hear more about how you knew Thomas." The young man smiled, and again Clara saw the governor in his features. "That's kind of you, ma'am. I'd be honored." As James Winters sat at her kitchen table that evening, Clara found herself studying him over their plates of chicken and potatoes. He spoke easily of his life, raised by a single mother who took in sewing, educated at the local school, now making a modest living as a trader between small towns. "My mother always wanted more for me," he said, cutting into his chicken. "Saved every penny for my schooling. Said my father would have wanted me to be educated." "She told you about your father?" Clara asked carefully. A shadow crossed James's face. "Only that he died before I was born. A good man," she said, "who would have been proud of me." He shrugged. "I stopped asking about him years ago. It only seemed to cause her pain." After James left, promising to stop by again on his next trip through town, Clara sat alone at her table. The governor's letter lay before her, its contents burning in her mind. James deserved to know the truth, didn't he? Or would that knowledge only bring him pain? The following days saw Clara digging deeper into the past. She spoke with the oldest residents of Willow Creek, casually asking about Margaret Winters. Most shook their heads, the name unfamiliar. But old Mrs. Dawson, who had once worked as a maid in the State House, paused at the mention. "Margaret Winters," she repeated, her rheumy eyes distant with memory. "Pretty young thing. Worked as a secretary for the governor, back when he was just starting in politics. Left town suddenly, must be 25 years ago now. There were rumors." She trailed off, then shook her head. "But then, there are always rumors about men in power." That night, Clara couldn't sleep. She lit a lamp and made her way to the attic, where boxes of Thomas's belongings still sat untouched. If her husband had known James, perhaps there was something here that could help her understand. The attic air was thick with dust. Clara moved carefully between stacked furniture and trunks until she found what she was looking for, Thomas's old desk. She pulled open the drawers, finding them filled with papers, receipts, and correspondence from his years as a carpenter. In the bottom drawer, beneath a stack of ledgers, she found a small wooden box. Inside were letters, photographs, and a leather-bound journal she had never seen before. Clara opened the journal with trembling fingers, recognizing Thomas's handwriting immediately. She began to read, the hours slipping away as she turned page after page. Thomas had written of his work, his hopes for their future, his love for her. And then, an entry dated 25 years earlier caught her eye. "Harmon came to me today. The girl is with child, and he is desperate. Asked if I knew of somewhere she could go, somewhere discreet. I suggested my cousin's place in Oak Ridge. He was grateful, promised to remember the favor. I wonder if Clara suspects anything. Better she doesn't know. Some burdens are not meant to be shared." Clara's breath caught. Thomas had known, had helped the governor hide his pregnant mistress, had kept this secret all through their marriage. She read on, finding scattered references over the years. Thomas had apparently kept track of Margaret and her son from a distance. Had even, it seemed, arranged for James to work briefly in Willow Creek a few years before his death. "The boy has his father's bearing," Thomas had written, "but none of his callousness. Margaret has raised him well, despite everything. He deserves better than the hand fate dealt him." Clara closed the journal, her mind reeling. Thomas, her Thomas, had carried this secret for decades, had looked into the eyes of the governor at town functions and political rallies, knowing what the man had done, had helped James without ever revealing the truth of his parentage. Why? Had Thomas been protecting the governor out of some misplaced loyalty? Or had he been protecting James and his mother from scandal? Morning found Clara exhausted but resolved. She dressed carefully and walked to the State House, the governor's letter tucked into her pocket. She didn't have an appointment, but she gave her name to the secretary and asked to see Governor Harmon on a personal matter. To her surprise, she was shown into his office within the hour. The governor rose from behind his massive desk as she entered, extending his hand with a politician's practiced smile. "Mrs. Jensen," he said warmly, "what brings you to see me today? I don't believe we've had the pleasure of meeting before." Clara studied him, seeing James in the shape of his eyes, the set of his jaw. "We haven't," she agreed. "But I believe you knew my husband, Thomas Jensen." Something flickered behind the governor's eyes, caution, perhaps, or recognition. "Jensen," he repeated. "Yes, I believe I did. A carpenter, wasn't he? Did some work here at the State House years ago. He did more than that, Clara said quietly. She reached into her pocket and withdrew the letter, placing it on the desk between them. He kept your secrets. The governor's face drained of color as he recognized the letter. He picked it up with unsteady hands, his eyes scanning the broken seal, the exposed contents. Where did you get this? He asked, his voice low and dangerous. The mail pouch that broke open last week, Clara said. I found it among the scattered letters. And you read it? It wasn't a question. I did. Governor Harmon sank back into his chair. What do you want, Mrs. Jensen? Money? A position? My term ends next year, but I still have considerable influence. I want nothing from you, Clara said, surprised to find it was true. Accept answers. I met your son last week. James. He seems a good man. The governor flinched at the name. You've spoken to him? Does he know? He knows nothing, Clara assured him. He believes his father died before he was born. That's what Margaret told him. Relief washed over the governor's face, followed quickly by something that might have been shame. Margaret thought it best, he said quietly. We both did. I was married, building my career. She was young, alone. The scandal would have destroyed us both. And now? Clara asked. James is a grown man. Your career is nearly over. What's left to protect? Governor Harmon stood and walked to the window, looking out over the town square. My legacy, he said finally. My family. My wife has stood by me for 30 years. My legitimate children are building lives of their own. What good would the truth do now, except cause pain? And James, Clara pressed, doesn't he deserve to know who he is? The governor turned back to her, his face hard. What he deserves is the life he has, free from scandal, free from the burden of being my mistake. He picked up the letter. I'll destroy this. No one need ever know. I'm grateful to you for bringing it to me directly, Mrs. Jensen. Your discretion will not be forgotten. Clara stood, suddenly weary of the man before her. My husband kept your secret for 25 years, she said. I found his journal. He tracked Margaret and James, made sure they were provided for. He even gave James work when he needed it, without ever telling him the truth. Thomas was a good man, the governor said softly. Better than you deserved, Clara replied. She turned to leave, then paused at the door. The town meeting is tomorrow night. You're scheduled to speak about your legacy, I believe. The governor nodded warily. I'll be there, Clara said. With what I know. She left him standing there, the letter clutched in his hand, fear etched across his face. That night, Clara sat on her porch swing, watching the stars emerge one by one. The weight of knowledge pressed down on her, the governor's secret, Thomas's complicity, James's unknown heritage. Tomorrow, she would have to decide what to do with it all. The town hall was packed the following evening. Clara found a seat near the back, her heart pounding as she watched townsfolk file in. Governor Harmon stood at the front of the room, shaking hands and smiling his politician's smile, though his eyes kept darting to the door, to the windows, to Clara herself. The meeting began with town business, discussions of road repairs, the upcoming harvest festival, a proposal for a new schoolhouse. Clara barely heard any of it. In her pocket was Thomas's journal, the damning entries marked with scraps of paper. Finally, the mayor introduced Governor Harmon, who rose to polite applause. He spoke of his years in office, the progress made, the challenges overcome. His voice was steady, but Clara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his eyes kept finding hers in the crowd. As I prepare to leave office next year, he said, I find myself reflecting on legacy, on what we leave behind, on the choices we make that shape not only our lives, but the lives of others. Clara's fingers closed around the journal in her pocket. One word from her, and everything would change. The governor's reputation destroyed, his family humiliated. And James, what would this knowledge do to James? To the memory of his mother, who had protected him all these years. The governor was still speaking, but his words had taken on a different tone. I have not always been the man I aspired to be, he said, his voice catching slightly. There are decisions I've made, actions I've taken, that I regret deeply. Burdens I've placed on others that should have been mine alone to carry. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the usual political rhetoric they were accustomed to hearing. In my remaining months in office, the governor continued, I intend to establish a fund for children raised by single parents in our state. to provide educational opportunities, apprenticeships, a chance for a better future. It cannot undo past wrongs, but perhaps it can create some measure of good from mistakes made long ago. His eyes found Clara's again, a silent plea in them. She sat motionless, the journal heavy in her pocket. When the meeting ended, Clara remained in her seat as others filed out. The governor was surrounded by townspeople, shaking hands, answering questions about his new fund. Only when the hall had nearly emptied did he make his way to where she sat. "Have you decided?" he asked quietly, sitting beside her. Clara looked at him for a long moment. "The fund," she said. "Will it help others like James?" "Yes," the governor nodded. "Substantially. I've already spoken with my lawyers about the endowment." "And James himself?" The governor hesitated. "I've arranged for him to be offered a position with a trading company in the capital. Better opportunities, better pay. He'll never want for anything." "Except the truth," Clara said. "Some truths serve no purpose except to wound," the governor replied. Margaret chose to protect him from this one. "Who am I? Who are you?" to decide she was wrong. Clara stood, the journal still in her pocket. "I need to think," she said. The next morning dawned clear and cool. Clara walked to the edge of town, to the ancient oak tree that stood alone on a small hill overlooking Willow Creek. Thomas had proposed to her beneath this tree nearly 30 years ago. They had picnicked in its shade, dreamed of their future together. From her pocket, Clara withdrew the governor's letter, which she had taken from his desk when he wasn't looking, and Thomas's journal. She traced her fingers over her husband's handwriting, feeling both betrayed by his secrecy and moved by his compassion for Margaret and her son. Clara had spent the night wrestling with what to do: expose the governor and bring the truth to light, or continue the conspiracy of silence that had protected James for 25 years. She knelt beneath the oak tree and began to dig with a small trowel she had brought. The earth was soft from recent rain, yielding easily to her efforts. When the hole was deep enough, Clara placed the letter and the journal inside, then covered them with dirt, patting the ground smooth. Some secrets belonged to the earth. Some truths served no purpose except to wound. Thomas had understood that. Perhaps, in time, she would too. As Clara walked back toward town, she saw a wagon approaching on the main road, James Winters, returning from his deliveries in the capital. He waved when he spotted her, his smile bright in the morning sun. "Mrs. Jensen," he called, pulling his wagon to a stop beside her. "I have news. I've been offered a position with Eastern Trading Company. A real opportunity, with fair pay and a chance to advance." "That's wonderful, James," Clara said, studying his face. The face that so resembled the governor's, yet shone with a warmth and openness the older man lacked. "Your mother will be proud." "I hope so," he said. "Everything I am, I owe to her." He hesitated, then added, "And to people like you and Thomas, those who showed kindness when it wasn't required." Clara reached up and squeezed his hand. "You deserved every kindness," she said. "And you deserve every good thing that comes to you now." She watched as he drove on toward town, his future bright with possibilities he had earned through his own merit. Behind her, the old oak tree stood sentinel over buried secrets, its branches swaying gently in the morning breeze. Clara turned her face toward home, carrying the weight of her choice, to protect rather than expose, to bury rather than unearth. It was a burden, but one she could bear. For James, for Thomas, and perhaps, in some small way, for herself.